You can see like where they've like turned over the leaves, and that's usually in close conjunction to a scrape. And they're grouped back up again. They do it before they lose their antlers. They're all like hanging out again, working the scrape, sparring, like similar to how they do in early season.
That second half of the rut seems like that's when the big bucks end up getting shot. Is that second half of the rut. So you mentioned that they kind of return to those areas that they were in, but they're more honed in. Can you kind of go a little bit deeper on that? Like, what do you exactly mean there?
So I would say it's more daylight activity. So like whereas that buck was showing up like once, sometimes twice a week, like he might come through at 9 o'clock at night, and then he would come back through at 3 a.m. working the exact same scrape, and the does were using it too. But it's like, how do I catch this buck in daylight? And I didn't really know, because it's like you could go hunt the laurel thicket, but that laurel thicket was like 12 acres, roughly, and it spans like the length of that ridge. So you're just kind of like throwing something at the wall and, hoping you're in the right spot. So in December, though, it's more like you can hunt that scrape and you have a really good chance of him coming through in daylight, whether it's winding it or whatever, or using the thermals, like walking on that bluff on the downside, which I think they use a lot, because once it gets dark, it's all those thermals pulling down there. And I have trail camera pictures. The first ones I got of him, he approached from the downward side, and he was like 50 yards out, and you can see his rack in his eyes, and he slowly comes up with his nose in the air, all the way to the scrape. So,
that fires me up.
Well, what you're saying also reminds me of Drew Atkinson from Arkansas, who had on a few times, because he's a big scrape hunter in the mountains in northern Arkansas, and he specifically said for hunting scrapes, he likes hunting them in September, early October, catching bachelor groups coming up to him, and then also that post-rut, like, they're rutting there mid-November, or actually late October, mid-November, first week of November, and he said like December and January, it's like that light, something happens, that light switch, and those bucks, like those big bucks, are back on those scrapes. It's just like the last bit of hope. Like there's got to be another single lady out here somewhere, okay? And he's like, that's when he capitalizes with a bow in the mountains, kind of late season, which is super, super interesting. And it makes me wonder how many other people might do that, or people who've thought about it and maybe had some success, but they haven't like continued to capitalize on it, or hopefully maybe you're tagged out before that happens so you don't have to worry about it. But if you're not, having that confidence of going to that late rut, post rut time frame, and have the confidence that like if you can figure out where that buck's at, because Drew likes using trail cameras too in those spots, if you can get that pattern where that buck's coming back through there a couple times a week, or if not every few days on daylight multiple times, checking that scrape, you go in there and capitalize on that deer.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's repeatable in a lot of areas, but specifically here, that's absolutely something that happens. And eventually, even into January, which the public land season closes at that point, but you see them start grouping up, and like more than once, I've got pictures of them fighting around the scrapes. I don't know if it's just to stay warm or what it is, but it's like, well, really though, I've got videos where it's like 16 degrees up there, and it's like you have these buck groups standing around the scrapes, and they're like sparring like for 30 minutes at a time, and it's like they're up there. Even later into season, they're like more honed in on these areas.
Let me ask you this, because there's other states. Arkansas is a great example. They have one of the longest deer seasons in the country. From like late September through the end of February, you can deer hunt, okay? If you say you could wave a magic wand and you had an extra 2 or 3 weeks to hunt on public land in Georgia, you can hunt through, say the end of January. How would that change your strategy, knowing what you've seen on camera data of how you would approach like that kind of hunting?
So it's funny you say that, because I was looking at the regs the other day, and I need to double check this, but I think they allow us another 2 weeks of archery this year on public. Now it's not gun, but it's public. And I probably shouldn't have said that, but it really doesn't make a difference. But
nobody's coming up
here.
Yeah.
But I will say, I can pull up trail camera pictures and video, and they even get more consistent. A lot of times it's the younger bucks, like 2 and 3 year olds, but even the mature ones, it's like they're more honed in. Like you asked earlier about red oaks. If we get a snow or like even a really hard frost, you can go out and you can see like where they've like turned over the leaves, and that's usually in close conjunction to a scrape. and they're grouped back up again. They do it before they lose their antlers. They're all like hanging out again, working the scrapes, sparring, like similar to how they do in early season.
Well, Andrew was running cameras, and he left them all season last year on a piece of public, some more mountainous part of the state that we hunt. And those bucks did that. There was a time, and actually, it was like February, because they rode a little bit later there. But it was like February, early February, right around when season went out, or right before season went out.
Valentine's Day.
And dude, these bucks were stacked in there. Groups, big 8-point. They had a camera on last year.
Oh yeah.
And we never hunted that spot. He just dropped cameras
Hammer.
off, kind of get some annual data. And dude, he's back in there just hanging out with all these other bucks, just all around these scrapes.
Oh yeah.
So-
We're going to make a withdrawal this year.
Yeah, yeah.
boy.
Could you hunt then? Was it open to hunt that late? Or?
No, well, so they were in there all season long, and in daylight too throughout January, and then February they kind of grouped back up. But that early January time frame there, they might have some problems.
Yeah, I mean, so it's like we never even hunted last year, but it was interesting seeing like what you're talking about. These bucks grouping back up, and I guess it's also just because where we had cameras at. You probably could find them other places, but it's socializing around those scrapes. And like they kind of hit the scrape, but they're just kind of like standing around, just messing around with each other, which, that's interesting to see. But the cool thing is, if y'all do have an extended season, or potentially maybe that happens in the future even more so, to be able to capitalize on that, if you had a tag left in your pocket, to be able to go and do that, I'm like, that's a cool experience. But again, kind of goes back to the woodsmanship and implementing trail cameras, just trying to get some kind of, you're not getting like a pattern to the aspect of like a guy sitting on a corn pile or feed or something like that, but getting an idea of how often these bucks are coming through and figuring out how you could potentially not only hunt a location in and around that area, but also figure out access. Do you ever look at that from like an access standpoint, like paying attention to how bucks are like coming into an area where you get them on camera and looking at their travel patterns to figure out how you can maybe get in there somewhat clean?
I would say so a little bit. A lot of times, like with the scrape above the bluff, they would almost always kind of circle right to the bluff, but they're not going to walk off the side of that, and then they'll turn and come up to the scrape. And actually, the first daylight picture I got of that buck last year was the 18th of November. I was actually on the way to Florida for vacation. It was at 12 noon. But I had two cameras because I set a camera on the trail on the bluff and then on the scrape. He hit the scrape, walked down to the bluff, and I got a picture of him walking away on that trail. So I got two different pictures about 80 yards apart, and I got him on both cameras. So sometimes it's predictable in how that they'll travel, but it's not always. I think if you can just get in an area like a creek bottom, that's how I access that. From that bluff, there was like a small drainage. It's not really a full-out creek, but it's like, water runoff is right there. So it's silent. You can kind of like hit that and then sneak straight up to it. So I'd say that's definitely an important part of it.
I've got to ask you this. Who planned a vacation November 18th? To Florida. I try to get you sleep on the couch, but I'm just wondering.
Yep, it was,
Okay.
Yep. It was, yeah, my wife's family.
Next question.
So, yep.
Okay.
It doesn't. Hey, I killed the buck 3 weeks later, so it's okay.
Hey, it all worked out.
Yeah,
Yep.
listen, stubbornness will get you far in life.
That's
Let me
right.
tell you. You got to be
Hey.
stubborn for those bucks.
Listen,